You won't co-sign your grandson's loan, then don't expect to stay here for long. That's what my daughter said to me, standing at the kitchen holding a spatula and her voice sharp as vinegar. I didn't say anything. It's not that I don't know the words to say, I just realized some silences carry more weight than argument. Though my 70-year-old knuckles were swollen with arthritis, a rage so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. I looked at the woman standing in the doorway. This wasn't the chubby-cheeked girl I had walked to kindergarten, or the blushing bride I had helped dress in white lace. This was a stranger with hard eyes and a mouth twisted into a sneer. Blythe, my own daughter, leaned against the doorframe of the kitchen. Her arms crossed over her chest like a barrier I could no longer cross. The silence stretched between us, heavy and toxic, broken only by the sound of the rain lashing against the double-paned windows of this suburban fortress in Oakbridge Estates. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She just delivered the ultimatum that shattered the last fragment of my heart. "It's a simple signature, Mother," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Kiernan needs this start. If you can't support this family, if you're going to hoard your money while your grandson suffers, then you don't need to be taking up space in this house. If you won't sign, then don't expect to stay here for long." The betrayal stung worse than a physical slap because it wasn't just about money. It was about the realization that to them, I was no longer a mother or a grandmother. I was just a wallet that had finally snapped shut. I know what it takes to co-sign a loan for a 22-year-old who barely kept his checking account in the black because I've been to that bank branch before. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in Australia, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't forget to like and subscribe, don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The kitchen island was a vast expanse of cold, white quartz, sterile and unforgiving under the harsh recessed lighting that Blythe insisted on keeping at full brightness. It was the kind of kitchen designed for magazines, not for cooking, and certainly not for the warmth of a family breakfast. Kiernan, my 22-year-old grandson, sat on one of the high bar stools, scrolling through his phone with a practiced indifference that made my teeth ache. He didn't look up when I entered, didn't acknowledge the grandmother who had funded his private school tuition or his first car. He just slid a thick stack of papers across the counter toward my coffee mug. The header was bold and aggressive. Business venture capital loan. Co-signatory required. The amount requested was $40,000. It was a staggering sum for a boy who had quit 3 different entry-level jobs in the last 6 months because the managers didn't respect his vision. "It's just a formality, Grandma," Kiernan mumbled, finally glancing up with eyes that held a terrifying mixture of entitlement and boredom. He didn't ask, he expected. "I have the concept for the app ready. I just need the capital for the developers. The bank just needs a guarantor with assets." "That's you." I looked at the papers, then at Blythe, who was vigorously chopping vegetables with a knife that sounded like a guillotine dropping against the cutting board. "I cannot do this, Kiernan," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I am on a fixed pension. My savings are for my end-of-life care. If you default, they take everything I have left." That was when the chopping stopped. The silence that followed was louder than the knife. Blythe turned slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face setting into that hard mask I was beginning to fear. "End-of-life care." Blythe laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that bounced off the stainless steel appliances. "You live here, Mother. To take care of you. We built this suite specifically for you." She gestured vaguely toward the hallway leading to my room. "We are your plan. But family helps family. Kiernan has a future. You have... well, you have a savings account gathering dust. If you can't see that, if you're going to be selfish, Then maybe this arrangement isn't working. That was the moment the trap snapped shut. The arrangement she spoke of was the life I had purchased for them. I looked at the loan papers, then at my daughter's cold face, and realized that my refusal wasn't just a financial decision. It was a declaration of war. And in this house, I was vastly outnumbered. To understand why that threat gutted me, you have to understand the geography of my sacrifice. 3 years ago, I didn't live in a guest room. I lived in a paid-off 2-bedroom craftsman bungalow on the edge of the city, a house with a wraparound porch and a garden where I grew tomatoes and hydrangeas. It was the house my late husband, Arthur, and I had bought 40 years ago. It was filled with memories, creaky floorboards, and the smell of old books and baking bread. But Blythe had come to me, eyes filled with tears, talking about the opportunity of a lifetime in Oakbridge Estates. She and her husband, Sutton, wanted to move to a better school district, a safer neighborhood, a place where we could all live together. Multi-generational living, she had called it. Sounded like a dream. I would never be lonely. I would watch Kiernan grow into a man. The math, however, required a sacrifice. They couldn't afford the down payment on the 5-bedroom executive home they had their eyes on. They needed a massive infusion of cash. So I did what mothers do. I sold the bungalow. I sold the place where Arthur had died, where Blythe had taken her first steps. I took the proceeds, over $200,000, and I handed it to them for the down payment. In exchange, they built the in-law suite on the ground floor. It was supposed to be my forever home, a place where I was an equal partner, a matriarch. I remembered the day we moved in. The boxes were still unpacked when Sutton, my son-in-law, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Welcome home, Meredith. You'll never have to worry about a thing again." Now, standing in this sterile kitchen, the memory of that promise tasted like ash. I realized with a sick, sinking feeling that I had made a catastrophic error in judgment. I hadn't bought a share in a home. I had paid an exorbitant entrance fee to a club where my membership could be revoked the moment I stopped paying dues. I had given up my autonomy, my sanctuary, and my leverage for a promise that was currently being held hostage over a $40,000 loan for a boy who couldn't even look me in the eye. The house wasn't a home. It was a leverage point. And I was no longer the benefactor. I was the tenant facing eviction. I retreated to my room that afternoon, locking the door, a habit I had developed recently as privacy became scarce. I needed to understand what I was being asked to fund. Kiernan claimed it was for an app development, vague terminology that usually meant he had watched too many videos by internet gurus promising overnight millions. I wasn't a tech wizard, but I knew how to follow a paper trail. I sat at my small desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the shared family cloud account, something they had set up years ago and likely forgot I had access to. Began to dig. I wasn't looking for code or business plans. I was looking for Kiernan's spending habits and digital footprint. What I found made my stomach turn over. There were no emails to developers. There were no draft contracts with software engineers. Instead, I found a series of browser bookmarks and saved screenshots related to a Crypto Alpha Mastermind course and, more damningly, a listing for a used high-performance sports car, a matte black Audi that cost exactly $42,000. The business was a sham. He wanted the loan to buy a car to impress a girl he had been tagging in Instagram posts, a girl who looked like she lived on a yacht. The app was just the palatable lie he told his mother to get her on his side. He was going to take a high-interest business loan, co-signed by me, and sink it into a depreciating asset and a gambling scheme disguised as investment. I sat there as the sun went down, casting long prison bar shadows across my floor. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't just asking me to support a dream. They were asking me to finance a lie. If I signed those papers, the bank would come for me when he inevitably defaulted. They would garnish my pension. They could put a lien on. Well, I didn't own this house. And that was the terrifying part. If I went broke paying his debt, Blythe would have even more reason to kick me out, claiming I was a financial burden. It was a lose-lose scenario. I printed the screenshots of the car and the crypto course, folding them neatly into my pocket. I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to have to prove why, even though I knew the truth might not set me free. It might just blow the roof off the house. The atmosphere in the house shifted instantly, like the sudden drop in pressure before a tornado touches down. It started with the small things. The next morning, the thermostat, which was usually kept at a comfortable 72 degrees, was set to 64. The house was freezing. When I walked into the hallway, wrapping my cardigan tighter around my thin frame, Blythe walked past me without a word, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, talking on her phone in a loud, animated voice about how stressful it was to deal with stubborn relatives who don't understand modern economics. It was a performance art of exclusion, designed to make me feel like a ghost in the space I had paid for. Dinner was the next battleground. Usually I cooked. It was one of my contributions to the household, a way to feel useful. But when I went to the kitchen at 5 p.m., the fridge was oddly bare of the ingredients I usually used. The chicken I had defrosted was gone. At 6:30, a delivery driver rang the doorbell. Blythe, Sutton, and Kiernan sat at the dining table unpacking containers of sushi. There were 3 place settings. It was 3. I stood in the archway of the dining room, watching them pass soy sauce and pickled ginger. Sutton at least had the decency to look ashamed, keeping his eyes on his plate, but Kiernan smirked, popping a roll into his mouth. "Oh," Blythe said, feigning surprise as she looked up. "We figured since you're so concerned about your finances, you'd prefer to handle your own meals from now on. We wouldn't want to eat into your precious savings." The cruelty was precise and calculated. It wasn't about the food. It was about the message. You are separate. You are not us. I turned around without a word, walked back to my suite, and ate peanut butter on toast, the dry bread sticking in my throat like sawdust. I could hear them laughing in the other room, a united front against the enemy within. I realized then that they were trying to break me psychologically, to make living there so unbearable that I would sign the loan just to buy back a scrap of warmth. 2 days later, the psychological warfare escalated into an overt offensive. I returned from my morning walk, my only escape from the suffocating tension of the house, to find my bedroom door ajar. I knew I had locked it. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp. I pushed the door open and froze. Nothing was stolen, but the room had been violated. My papers were shuffled. The drawers of my nightstand were slightly open. But the centerpiece of this invasion was sitting squarely on my pillow, perfectly centered like a mint in a hotel. It was a glossy brochure. The cover featured smiling elderly people playing chess in a sunlit room. The title read, "Sunset Gardens. Assisted Living and Memory Care." I picked it up, my hands trembling. Sunset Gardens was notorious in our town. It wasn't a luxury retirement community. It was a state-subsidized facility known for understaffing and the smell of bleach and despair. It was a place you went when you had no money and no family. Inside the brochure, someone, Blythe undoubtedly, had circled the shared room economy package in red marker. It was a threat, plain and simple. Sign the loan or this is your future. They were implying I was incompetent, that perhaps I needed care, that my refusal to help the family was a sign of cognitive decline. It is a common tactic abusive children use to gain control over parental assets. I sat on the edge of the bed, the glossy paper crinkling in my grip. I looked around the room I had paid to build. The custom blinds, the hardwood floors, the ensuite bathroom with the safety rails I had installed with my own money. They were trying to scare me out of my own home. But as I stared at the smiling stock photo seniors, something in me shifted. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I had survived the death of my husband. I had survived cancer in my 50s. I was not going to be bullied by a daughter who measured love in bank transfers and a grandson who thought the world owed him a luxury car. I threw the brochure in the trash. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. But I needed allies, and I needed to know exactly where I stood legally. I knew I couldn't crack Blythe. She was the general of this operation. Kiernan was too selfish to care. That left Sutton. My son-in-law was a man who preferred the path of least resistance, a man who let his wife steer the ship even as she steered it into the rocks. I found him in the garage that Saturday, tinkering with a lawnmower that didn't need fixing. He jumped when I closed the door behind me, the sound echoing in the concrete space. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had lost weight. "Meredith," he stammered, wiping grease on a rag. I didn't know you were out here." "We need to talk, Sutton," I said, stepping past the lawnmower to block his exit path. "And don't give me the party line. I want to know why you're letting them do this. I paid for the down payment on this house. Why are you treating me like a squatter?" Sutton slumped against the workbench, the fight draining out of him before it even began. He looked at the floor, shame coloring his neck red. "It's not just the loan, Meredith," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We're underwater. The mortgage, it's an adjustable rate. The payments doubled last month. We're maxed out on the credit cards." The truth spilled out like oil from a cracked engine. Kiernan's loan wasn't just for a car. They were hoping he could flip the money or start something that would bring cash in. They were desperate. They had been living a lifestyle they couldn't afford, fueled by the equity my down payment had provided, and now the bill was due. Blythe thinks. She thinks if Kiernan gets this money, he can pay off some of the credit card debt under the table, and we can refinance later, Sutton admitted, refusing to meet my eyes. "She's terrified we're going to lose the house." I stared at him. They weren't just greedy, they were drowning. And instead of asking for help, they had decided to cannibalize the only person who had actually saved them. "So you're going to use my credit to plug a hole in your sinking ship?" I asked quietly. Sutton didn't answer. He just closed his eyes. I had my confirmation. Monday morning, while Blythe was at her Pilates class and Kiernan was sleeping till noon, I called a taxi. I didn't drive anymore. Blythe had convinced me to sell my car last year to save on insurance, but I had my own account and my own agency. I went to see Mr. Halloway, the family attorney who had handled Arthur's will. He was an old-school lawyer, the kind with a mahogany desk and a hatred for nonsense. I laid everything out: the down payment check, the lack of a formal loan agreement, the current threats, the brochure for the nursing home. "I need to know," I said, clasping my hands to stop them from shaking. "Do I have any rights? My name isn't on the deed." I trusted them. Mr. Halloway put on his spectacles and looked at the copies of the bank transfers I had brought. He frowned, tapping a gold pen against his lip. "Legally on paper, it was a gift, Meredith. That's how the mortgage company viewed it to approve their loan. You have no title to the property." My heart stopped. The room seemed to spin. "However," he continued, his voice sharpening, "there is a concept called a constructive trust or unjust enrichment. You sold your primary residence and transferred the funds with a clear, implied understanding that you would have a life interest in the property. The construction of the in-law suite is physical proof of that agreement. If they evict you, they are unjustly enriched by your contribution. He leaned forward. It's not a slam dunk, and it would be a messy lawsuit. But the threat of it, the threat of a lease pendens, a notice of pending legal action, would freeze their ability to refinance or sell the house. You can effectively lock the asset. He handed me a heavy cream-colored envelope. I've drafted a letter. It outlines your equity stake and demands repayment if you are forced to vacate. It's a shield, Meredith. Use it. I took the envelope. It felt heavier than paper. Felt like ammunition. I wasn't just an old woman in a guest room anymore. I was a creditor with the power to freeze their world. I chose my moment carefully. It was Tuesday night. The tension in the house was so thick you could taste it, metallic and sour. Blythe had started leaving boxes outside my door. Empty ones, a subtle hint to start packing. I walked into the dining room while they were eating. I didn't sit. I stood at the head of the table, the envelope in my hand. Blythe looked up, a forkful of pasta halfway to her mouth. Did you decide to sign? She asked, her tone bored, as if asking if I'd taken out the trash. Because if not, I really don't want to hear it, Mother. I've already spoken to a realtor about renting out your suite. We need the income. I'm not signing the loan, Kiernan, I said, my voice projecting clearly. Kiernan slammed his hand on the table. Then get out. You're just a leech. Blythe nodded in agreement. You heard him. End of the month. We can't afford passengers. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the printouts, the Audi listing, the crypto scam screenshots, and tossed them onto the table. They fluttered down onto the pasta bowls. I know it's for a car, Kiernan. And I know you're broke, Blythe. Sutton told me everything. Blythe's face went white, then blotchy red. She shot a venomous look at Sutton, who shrank into his chair. How dare you, she hissed. This is my house. I make the rules. I slapped the heavy cream envelope from Mr. Halloway onto the table with a crack that made them all jump. Actually, I said, my voice finding a steel core I hadn't felt in years. It's a house purchased with my money. That is a formal notice from my attorney regarding a constructive trust. If you try to evict me, if you try to rent this room, I will sue you for the return of my $200,000 plus interest. I will tie this house up in court for years. You won't be able to refinance. You won't be able to sell. The bank will foreclose on you long before a judge rules against me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a predator realizing the prey has teeth. Blythe picked up the letter, her hands shaking as she read the legal jargon that threatened to dismantle her fragile suburban kingdom. You wouldn't, she whispered, looking up at me with genuine fear for the first time. You'd bankrupt us. We're family. The irony was so sharp I almost laughed. Family? Yes. Family doesn't threaten nursing homes. Family doesn't starve their mother. Family doesn't demand fraud. I looked at them, my daughter a bully, my grandson a con artist, my son-in-law a coward. And I realized I didn't want to stay. Even if I won, even if I forced them to let me stay, the air here was poisoned. I didn't want to die in a house where I was tolerated but not loved. I don't want to live here anymore, I said, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. But I am not leaving empty-handed. You have 30 days. 30 days for what? Blythe asked, her voice trembling. To sell the house, I commanded. You can't afford it anyway. Put it on the market. When it sells, you will pay me back my initial investment plus 20% appreciation. If you don't, I file the lawsuit and the bank takes it all and you get nothing. Those are your options. I'm going to stay with my sister in Florida until the closing. You have until tomorrow to agree in writing. I turned my back on them. I didn't wait for an answer. I knew the math. They had no choice. I walked back to my room, packed the suitcase that Blythe had so eagerly wanted me to pack, and for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. It has been 6 months since that night. I am writing this from a balcony overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. The salt air is different from the sterile air of Oakbridge Estates. It smells like freedom. Blythe and Sutton sold the house. They had to. The market was cooling, and they were desperate to avoid the lawsuit. They walked away with almost nothing after paying off the mortgage, the credit cards, and me. I recouped my $200,000, plus a little extra that I used to buy a modest sunny condo in a 55-plus community near my sister. I don't speak to Blythe often. She calls occasionally, usually when she's been drinking, to blame me for ruining their lives and forcing them into a 2-bedroom apartment across town. She tells me Kiernan had to get a job at a warehouse because he couldn't get a loan for his business. She says it like it's a tragedy. I see it as a lesson he should have learned years ago. I don't apologize. I don't offer to help. I listen, I say, that sounds difficult, and I hang up. I learned a hard lesson in my twilight years. You cannot buy love, and you certainly cannot buy respect. I thought I was securing my future by investing in my family, but I was only enabling their worst impulses. I lost my craftsman bungalow, yes, but I regained my dignity. I sip my iced tea and watch the sunset, not the Sunset Gardens nursing home, but a real vibrant sunset over the ocean. I refused to co-sign a loan, and my daughter was right. I didn't stay there for long. But leaving was the best decision I ever made. If you're listening to this and something in your life feels like slow erasure, if your presence is tolerated more than it's welcomed, if your silence is mistaken for agreement, I want you to know you're not too old to begin again. You're not too late to protect your dignity. If they make you feel saying no is betrayal, remember this. Your peace is not luxury, it's your right, and it's never too late to claim it. If this story resonated with you, please don't hesitate to like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can share more with each other. Please leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from.